Germany won the inaugural mixed team event on home soil. Jake Jarman has a few suggestions for how to tweak the competition, and we talk strategy about how to be successful in this competition. And hint, it's not simply being the best team on the floor. For those new here, I'm Kensley, the host of Neutral Deductions, a podcast all about men's gymnastics. This is episode 73, where I recap the first European Championships mixed team final. So I know my intro is all about, we are a podcast all about men's gymnastics. Now, we are going to talk a little bit about women's gymnastics today because it does have to do with men's gymnastics with this mixed team cup. So for those of you expecting me only to talk about the men, that's not exactly going to happen today because the strategy for the women and how they perform does play into this mixed team final. So coming into the mixed team challenge or mixed team event, we got news that Romania had pulled out ahead of time, that Ana Barbosu wanted to focus on the all-around final, and so that took Romania out because you cannot just pull one gymnast out. If one person pulls out, the whole team pulls out. So they were replaced by Austria. And coming into the team final, based on qualifications, the top 5 teams were Italy, followed by Great Britain, followed by France, followed by Hungary, followed by Germany. So coming into this competition, I didn't really know what to expect. I haven't watched a lot of Swiss Cup or other mixed team events that have taken place over the years, so I really wanted to not do a lot of research beforehand and just sit back and watch the competition and give my initial impressions overall. And my very first impression of this competition was that I really enjoyed getting to know gymnasts that I don't watch frequently. So when covering gymnastics, whether it's for NBC or for Neutral Deductions or for someone else, it's really common to prioritize the top teams and qualifications, and they are also typically the same athletes that do end up filling up the all-around and event finals and team finals. So this partnership and the way the mixed team final worked, it actually offers this opportunity to watch gymnasts one at a time and look at other athletes that you might overlook in qualifications because there is a quote unquote more important or higher ranking team going at the same time. And so one example for me was Maria Drobnovic of Poland. And I found her choreography really engaging, and it was not a routine that I would have otherwise watched specifically for women, because if I am covering women at the Olympics, it's typically someone has brought me in to cover like the very high level teams because they just need another set of eyes. So that was really exciting to see. And I think while I have seen all of these male routines here at this competition, I think a lot of other people haven't. And so what I kept seeing over and over on the streams on Twitter and on Reddit was people saying, I am actually able to get into this competition and I'm able to watch men and being exposed to other athletes. And so I think that this competition is going to do a lot of good for the exposure of men's gymnastics. I felt like one of the maybe negative sides of this competition was that the crowd at times seemed to be a little bit lackluster, like they didn't know what to do. And of course, this is the first time that this competition is coming up. Now, German crowds in general are extremely engaging when it comes to events. Like, they are definitely the ones who are going to get up and do the YMCA on their feet and sing songs and do cheers. And so this is not a reflection of the crowd itself, but rather I think that the sort of timing between the events, so they were alternating men and women from each team, that they were waiting for the score to come up before letting the other gymnasts go. So there was a lot of downtime over this competition. And I think it would be potentially helpful if they put 2 people together. So for example, for the British team, you had Jake Jarman and Ruby Evans. So if Ruby goes first, don't wait for her score to come up before then Jake gets to go on his event. Just immediately have Jake go and then have their total score flash up at a certain point. I think that would sort of help with the timing thing. The other thing I felt about the timing that was a little bit hard and kind of this like, oh, we've got a lot of momentum and now we've got to really slow down, was in the first rotation, there were like 3 sub rotations. And of course, this is important to give athletes the opportunity to warm up. Of course, we saw like repercussions of athletes not being able to warm up properly in event finals of prior years where, the athlete who's 8th had to warm up at the same time as the athlete who's first. And the FIG has sort of introduced this ability where at the halfway mark, athletes can re-warm up. So with 16 teams, they broke it up into 3 groups. And so it was, 4 or 5 athletes go, and then there's a break, and then another set of athletes go, and then there's a break for warm up, and then another set of athletes go. And there was just a lot of downtime, and I don't know how you fix that part and maintain the safety of the athlete. All I can tell you is that for the crowd, everything really died down, and it was really hard to kind of like, okay, like let's ramp them back up. But I do think the German announcers did a pretty good a job getting the crowd back into things, but those were just sort of some of my first observations. The other thing I will say is I found that women's vault to be pretty obviously the weakest part of this competition. We saw a lot of the same vaults. A lot of them were a little, in my opinion, lackluster. And then in that second group of the first rotation, every single female athlete did vault versus, the men who were doing differing events. And so it just felt really monotonous. Actually, at some point, the announcer even joked about seeing the same vault over and over and over. So, I thought like, okay, well, what if they actually changed the events and maybe they went with uneven bars instead? And ultimately, the organizers of the event said that there wasn't room to have both uneven bars and have high bar, and so they ended up going with vault. I don't know. I'm not convinced that vault is the best option for this particular event, but I would need to wait and see a couple more renditions of it before I feel like I'm concretely in the no women's vault category. Following the first rotation, and moving on to the second round, was Switzerland in first, followed by Great Britain, Italy, France, Spain, Germany, Belgium, and Norway. And what I found really interesting about this was that Hungary qualified in the top 5, and they actually didn't make it out of round 1. So in round 2, this is where strategy really came into play. And those that understood it knew best that their shot at a guaranteed medal was to be among the top 2 teams. So I mentioned this in my preview episode, and I'll mention this again. So out of round 2, the top 2 teams move on to the gold medal round. So they are guaranteed a medal, either a gold or a silver. And then teams 3 and 4 have to fight it out for bronze. So it's not just that all 4 teams move on to the final round and then whoever is like the top ranking score gets gold, silver, bronze. Like there is a lot of strategy that comes in the second round where you kind of want to pick your best events here to ensure that you're going to get into that gold, silver medal round so that you are ensured a medal. So what ended up happening was Great Britain, Germany, and France planned to do their strongest pieces in round 2 to ensure that place in the final. And ultimately, of course, only 2 of those teams could make it. And then this left some of their weaker events for the final. And what Italy did was Italy ended up saving their best pieces for the final round, or at least Manila Esposito did. And while they did end up winning a medal, it is certainly possible that it could have been a higher color had they chosen a different strategy. So in round 3, it ended up being a kind of a knockout round with France and Italy fighting it out for bronze. So the French, Morgane Osisek, started on floor, and what happened with her was her third pass ended up being botched. I want to say she was doing a front full that was going to be a connecting pass into maybe a double tuck or a full in. I'm unsure exactly what that routine was going to be, but it was very clear that she botched that and was only able to manage a layout out of it. So her difficulty was going to be a lot lower. And then for Italy, Lorenzo Casali went to parallel bars, and Manila Esposito went to balance beam. So Manila Esposito is a European champion on balance beam. She is an Olympic medalist on balance beam. So this is clearly her strongest apparatus. And so whoever picked this, whether it was her or her coach, saved this for the final rotation. And it's unclear if they maybe misunderstood the strategy or if she didn't want to put beam in one of the other rounds for risk of falling, but her beam is so far superior to basically everything else that we saw in that competition that she probably could have fallen and still gotten into that next round. So for the men's side, what Lorenzo did is he actually put floor in second, which was his best piece. And he's actually qualified in first into the floor final above Artem Dolgopyat. So what it sort of seems like is that maybe the men's side of the Italian team understood how this was going to work, and maybe the women's side didn't, or, again, they could have chosen beam for some other reason. But ultimately, I feel like they were the strongest team actually on the floor, but the best that they were going to be able to do because of the strategy that plays into this competition was to get that bronze medal, which is exactly what they did. So the final round was Great Britain versus Germany. So the Germans went first. Timo Ader went on high bar, hit a clean routine, and then Karina went to balance beam. She has a lot of difficulty there. It wasn't, I would say, maybe the strongest apparatus for her, but ultimately it was enough to keep them in the mix. So then we had Jake go on high bar, and Jake Jarman actually matched Timo Ader's score. So it was just down to Ruby, and Ruby's difficulty score is just not as strong as Karina's, and ultimately Germany ended up winning the inaugural Mixed Team Cup at home by 1/10 of a point. So there's been a lot of discussion about people not liking or maybe not understanding this format, because if you were to go by straight scores, then actually Italy should have won this competition. Listen to the final scores here. So Germany, who won, got a 25,566. Great Britain, who got silver, got a 25,466. Okay, listen here. Italy got a 27,966 in the final. France got a 25,699. So both Italy and France topped both Germany and Great Britain score in the last round. But here's the thing. What makes this an interesting competition, and why I think it potentially has teeth, is that there's an element of strategy that is often missing in gymnastics. We do see strategy come into play in other German systems like the Bundesliga work. But each team has to understand that the ultimate goal is to get into the final medal match that guarantees them a medal. And then they kind of, in that round, have to hope that their quote-unquote worst event is better than the other team's worst event, which makes it kind of hilarious to watch and very interesting. And again, as I mentioned earlier, it sort of feels like maybe the Italians didn't fully understand this, or maybe they thought that they could get through regardless. But ultimately, Germany and Great Britain had the better strategy. After the competition, we were able to get some interviews, and I was able to interview the British team and the German team. The German team was in absolute shock and genuinely so excited. They were so gracious in their interview to the crowd, to the coaches, and just overall enjoyed the competition. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Timo Ader and Karina Schoenmeier, you really should be considering them as key players in the future of German gymnastics, and keep them in the realm of gymnasts to watch. When I got to the British team, I had asked Jake Jarman if he actually didn't understand the format of the competition, or if he was just trolling the gymternet when he had put out on Twitter or X that he was like, hey, what are the rules of this thing? And he was like, no, I actually didn't fully understand what was happening, because he thought there were only going to be 8 teams qualified. And I think actually that was not an uncommon misunderstanding. And several people even mentioned that they thought maybe 16 teams was too many. Maybe it should be 12, or maybe it should be 8 getting into the final, which would maybe help the flow of things. I'm going to hold out a little bit on making a judgment or a firm opinion about that, because I would like to see the format tweaked a little bit, with being able to be a little bit more efficient with timing going back and forth. But I think that that's an interesting point to keep in mind. So I was also able to ask his partner in the competition, Ruby, if she was nervous to do beam in the final rotation. And she said that she was actually really calm, more so in qualifications, which I found very interesting, because I would have thought, knowing that gold was on the line, that having to go up the very last competitor on beam, to be full of nerves. So again, I found that very interesting. And then I went back to Jake and I asked him, what would you do if you could change anything about the competition? Well, actually, I asked this to both Ruby and Jake like grabbed the microphone out of Ruby's hand and he had a lot of thoughts. So if you want to know what he had to say about how he would change the format, those interviews are on YouTube. And I would greatly, greatly appreciate if you would take the time to go watch those interviews, learn what the athletes have to say. Please subscribe on YouTube, like the videos. This really helps us out. And again, we're so pleased and proud to be able to bring you this information live from Germany. So if you are enjoying this coverage and you would like to help financially support our trip and the ability to bring you interviews and purchase things like new microphones so that you can get better quality content, please consider donating. So the PayPal link is in every show note at the bottom of every article on neutraldeductions.com, or you can donate via PayPal or Stripe. If you have questions, comments, or insider tips, you can email us at neutraldeductions@gmail.com. That's all for this week. We'll see you next time.